Hi, and welcome to another episode of Paladin. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. So far, these episodes, I've looked at books mostly written in the last 10 or 15 years and kind of given you my thoughts on those books. Today we're going to look at a book that's a little bit older. It's about 20 or 25 years now, and that is The Body Keeps Score. And another thing that's different about this book is some of you who are in psychology probably know about this book. You may not have been aware of many of the other books that I've looked at because they were more current, more recent. But if you've been in psychology for any time at all, you're probably familiar with van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps Score. So I want to look at that book from a Christian perspective. Another difference that I want to do with this is because this book makes some pretty interesting claims and is really a deep book, I'm going to spend 3 different episodes looking at 3 different parts of this book because I want to be able to take my time. Rather than gracing you with one big long video, I'm going to do three parts. So in this first one, I just want to kind of introduce you to the background of his views and maybe still interact with him a little bit. In the second video, we'll look at what he actually says about trauma. And then in the third video, we'll focus a lot more on how we look at this from a Christian perspective, although we'll be doing that all the way around. So first I want to say that there are a lot of controversies because this book has been around, again, for 20 or 25 years. There are a lot of controversies with his views and his personhood. The first controversy was when his book first came out. It launched or had something to do with what was called repressed memory syndrome. And he was accused of being one of the authors of that, and that his views provide justification for that. He denies the majority of that. The second one is the most recent, what's called trauma creep, where the definition of trauma is broadened to such a broad degree that anybody who offends you about anything is traumatizing you, and therefore severe action needs to be taken against them. It's what we know today as cancel culture, and he's been blamed for that too. He denies that his views reinforce either one of those. He thinks that if you blame him for either one of those views, you haven't really understood what he said. He also got blamed later for personally contributing to a hostile work environment, and he ended up having to resign from the treatment center that he actually founded. He is still making videos and still a major name, and he survived that kind of trauma for himself. But all that to say, I just wanted to make you aware I am aware of the controversies that relate to this man. However, I'm going to restrict my comments to what he says in his book, The Body Keeps Score. I'm not going to weigh in on, where I come down on the various controversies. Because I think the majority of the people who read his book aren't even aware of the controversies, but they do read his book. So that's what we're going to look at today, and in these 3 episodes. So before I get into this, the introduction today, he provides 4 statements in his introductory chapter that I think resonate quite well with me, but also provide a foundation for, if you understand these 4 statements, then the rest of his book will get a good hearing with you. But if you take issue, or to the degree that you take issue with any of these 4 statements, you're probably going to stumble over his implications throughout the rest of the book. So I thought it would be good to begin our discussion with 4 of these things and see where we land on those. And maybe you could use this for yourself to ask yourself, how much do I agree or disagree with this? The first one is, he talks in the introduction about how he got involved with trauma, and how that when he first began to work with traumatized patients, the plan, the standard method of treatment was to listen to the client until you got a list of symptoms that you could put together in a diagnosis from the DSM, or the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. Back in his day, I think it was probably 4, maybe 5. We're on DSM-5 right now. But anyway, he would say back then, you listened just long enough to get a symptom constellation, and then you looked at what you had learned about trauma from your textbooks, and you would apply that to this particular case. And he said that his mentor challenged him that this was actually backwards, that what he has learned most about trauma has not come from textbooks, but rather from interviewing his clients and listening deeply to them and listening to their experience. And I would say this is the implication of this is that he is not going to defend his views of trauma from some kind of academic source, but rather he's going to defend his views of trauma from what he has heard his patients say. And so to whatever degree you're comfortable with that, I tend to be comfortable with that. I enjoy meeting new clients. I know some counselors, especially when they first start out, they get really scared to meet a new client because they're afraid. But I actually enjoy it. It's an opportunity to get to know somebody that I don't know before. And I actually prefer, sometimes I get clients from other therapists, and I prefer to meet the client first and then later on read the case notes from the previous therapist, because I don't want to be biased. I want to hear from my client first, because I think their experience of what is going on in their life is probably more helpful and going to be more helpful to them than what the previous counselor would put in their notes. Not that the previous counselor's notes are worthless, but I just want to be able to look at clients with a fresh slate. So I really appreciate what van der Kolk does here when he says that the best textbook is your patient. But then he also quotes Freud, which kind of makes me endearing to him too, because I am sympathetic with some, not all, of Freud's views. And he says that Freud is famous for this particular quote, and I don't know if this is true or not, but he claims that Freud said somewhere along the line that this person is struggling with memories. This person is suffering from memories. And I just thought that was a good quote, because what that means is you're not just suffering from whatever happened to you or whatever trauma you may have experienced, but you're suffering from the memory of that. And that therefore most of our suffering, at least trauma victims, their suffering comes from their memories of the past. That their past is being acted out again and again in their present day, or at least has an impact on their present day. And I think that's a really important point, that if you have not resolved the trauma in your life or ever tried to treat it or look at it or explore it or process it, if you've never tried to do that, then you're probably kind of stuck in repeating that trauma in many ways. And so on that sense, on that point, I think Freud was right, that we can suffer from memories, and especially the memories. What memories are create most suffering? Well, the memories of suffering, the things that have hurt us or traumatized us, are the things that usually haunt us much later, sometimes decades later. I've had many clients who have been suffering from trauma in their childhood, and it haunts them all the way through their adult life. So I think it is possible that you can suffer from memories. That's his second point. The third point is that he believes that humans are meaning-making creatures, which is interesting that he calls us creatures, but we'll get into that later. But we're meaning-making creatures. We don't just list facts. When we tell stories about our lives, we don't just say, and then I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this. We usually tell a story with some kind of underlying meaning, underlying purpose. We're not usually content with just a bunch of random facts. We want to put meaning to it. And especially when it comes to pain and suffering or trauma, that we don't know what to do with trauma. And so we have to come up with some kind of meaning for it. And again, if we haven't processed accurately or helpfully or therapeutically what happened, we're typically going to come up with a story or a narrative that is even more damaging than the event itself. It's kind of like the cascade of damage that I talk about in my forgiveness book, shameless plug. But anyway, the idea is that something happened to you, and then how do you interpret what happened to you can oftentimes be a secondary level of trauma, where you re-traumatize yourself. And the reason we do that is because we are meaning-making creatures. We don't just exist. but we want to create some kind of meaning out of. So in other words, we want to answer the why question. And that leads to his fourth point, is that one of the tools that we have to create meaning in our lives is our imagination. We are not animals that just work on our drives. This is where I disagree with Freud. We are not just animals that are driven to reproduce and die or eat and sleep and all that. We have an imagination, and in our mind we can construct meaning. That's point 3. But point 4 is we have an imagination. We can think about things in the future. We can remember things in the past. We can construct things that may or may not be real. And this can be an incredible tool, especially for artists, but also for writers, and maybe, again, maybe as image bearers of God, we are all creative in some kind of way. And so we all have an imagination where we can think beyond the material world that we're stuck in. And van der Kolk would say that is harmed by trauma. That imagination is reduced or corroded or damaged. And so then we're limited on the ways that we can think about what happened. And so then we get stuck and we can't imagine any other meaning. And so we're stuck with the damaging, re-traumatizing meaning that we have put together. So the 4 points are: we listen to our clients, we are meaning-making creatures, we suffer from memories, and then we try to make meaning out of those memories, and oftentimes trauma inhibits our imagination, which means we're limited in the explanations that we can come up with. All of this groundwork is related to what he's going to say about trauma. And so what he means is that things are really hard, and that trauma really hurts. Now, I'll kind of anticipate where I'm going to go next, but one of the disappointments that I have with the at least first few chapters of his book, and actually I've read the book twice, and he never really defines what trauma is. He more emphasizes the effects of trauma. And so I think we need to spend some time on what trauma really is. And we'll look at that in our next episode. So I hope you join me for that. See you then.